Session number 1 of Kawaiwai no Nahupana HCBE4All. O Grant Murata ko'u inoa no Kamehameha. My name is Grant Murata. I will be the facilitator for this session.
And my name is Tasha Lopez. I'll be your moderator for this session. And I will be monitoring the chat and questions towards the end of our presentation.
So mahalo for joining us this morning. As we kind of go through this virtual space, we ask for your grace and understanding if we have any kind of technical issues. We've gotten much better. I think everyone's gotten much better over the past year, but we're still learning. So just a couple of housekeeping things as we start. The session will be recorded, as is mentioned earlier, so that if you have any issues with it, or there's another session you might even want to check out that happens to be at the same time, we'll be sending out that information after the conference. We will be muting everyone's mic during the presentation to just avoid the background noise. So if you have a question, please just use the chat. And as Tasha mentioned, we'll be doing question and answers at the end. Please, we're asking if you do not share your screen or click on the stop recording button that might be available on some of your screens, if you could leave those alone. And if you happen to log off, something happens, your kid jumps on the computer and knocks you off, please just go back to the link and join us again, and then we'll continue. Like I mentioned before, you can jump in and we can see the recording after the event. So I would just like to welcome Claire Stabile in Kaimuki and Chad Otoshi from Kapuhulu, and they will be presenting on Hawaiian Culture Based Approaches to Data. So if you want to unmute your mic just for a second or unmute your camera, and let's join me in giving them a warm welcome to Claire and Chad.
Aloha.
Aloha. Aloha.
Aloha mai kako, o vau o Claire Stabile, no ho'ama Kaimuki Oahu. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Stabile and I live in beautiful Kaimuki on the island of Oahu.
And o Chad Otoshi ko'u inoa, no ho'ama Kapuhulu. I'm Chad Otoshi. I live in Kapuhulu, which is also on the island of Oahu. And we want to mahalo you guys for attending our session. We'll be speaking on Hawaiian culture-based approaches to data. And Claire and I feel strongly that aligning data methodology with culture-based instruction is a necessary change. And we're happy to share with all of you the initial steps that we've taken along this path. Before we begin, I wanted to acknowledge Nick Francisco, who was a Kumu at Pāhoa Elementary, and it's his great work that will be incorporated into our presentation. It's all of the awesome stuff he did with HCBE in the classroom that allowed us to tackle this huge challenge and allowed us to get the data that we have in order to share with you guys. So Nick is also responsible for this conference. He's part of the planning team. And so we mahalo him for that. We owe Nick in so many ways. And then just to share the good vibes going on in his life, Nick just had a daughter that was born. So while we wish that he were here because he's responsible for all of this work, he's a little busy right now. So he couldn't be with us as part of this presentation in person, but he's here throughout in spirit. So we just wanted to acknowledge Nick to begin with. And I would also like to say that a lot of this work was done prior to this COVID pandemic. So some of the techniques or pictures that you see might make you a little worried given our current situation, but just know that this was done prior to COVID, and the safety and well-being of our keiki and haumāna are always and always will be our #1 priority. So along those same lines though, these techniques and some of the approaches that we'll be discussing we'll briefly touch on ways that they can be addressed and can still be handled and initiated regardless of COVID. So without any further ado, I would like to start off by just kind of going through a general background of our problem or the challenge that we're being faced with. So while working with Nick, the challenge that came up was that we realized that new approaches need to be taken to accurately capture the impact of HCBE programming. While we did face this challenge with Nick, it's one that many Kumu are also facing in their classrooms. So any Kumu who's implementing any types of culture-based programs really want to know the impact that these types of programs are having on their students. And many are seeing this impact. They're well aware of it. To them, it's obvious. But then when it comes to reporting and sharing the impact of a program, it's been a real challenge. And so we're lucky because of the position we're in to try to do something, take these initial steps to try to tackle this challenge. And that's exactly what Ku'ukahakalao had kind of, a little bit of this came up in what she was sharing with us. She had so many great things to talk about. But one thing that resonated with me was when she said, what can you do? What can you do to help this evolution, this progress and success of HCBE? So what we're sharing with you here is what little, and I say that from a humble perspective, what we've done, but what little we've done in going and trying to tackle this challenge and the journey that we've gone through. So to begin with, as we pointed out, there's this problem of showing impact. And so let's take a second and just think about why this problem even exists. Ku did touch on it, but I just want to kind of reiterate and just illustrate why there is this kind of dichotomy between what the teachers are seeing and then what's showing up in reporting. So one of the main reasons why program evaluation and data collection has not kept up and evolved with the progress that's happening in classrooms is the difference between the progress that's occurred in classrooms and the progress that's occurred with data. So if we take a look at a classroom from the 1940s, things have changed dramatically when you look at today's classroom. So there's been huge advances with technology, the setup of classrooms, and basically there has been this growth from a technology sense. But what there's also been huge growth in, and this conference itself can attest to that, is that there are huge changes being made in how keiki are learning. There are changes in the classroom setting that they have, the types of things they're learning, and the approaches that are being taken in instruction. So one of the main benefits of HCB is the fact that keiki are being put in their own Aina. Keiki are learning about their own Aina. And this is super important, just as far as the type of education and the level of education that can be provided, because keiki learning can be looked at as a number of stages, right? And one of the later stages have to do with how they're taking the learning from the classroom and then moving that into the real world. So what HCBE does, one of the many advantages it does, is it's directly showing keiki how this learning applies to their world, applies to their Aina. And so what we're excited about is the fact that what the initial steps we're taking will hopefully one day enable everyone else to see those reports, the data. We want those things to be able to show these tremendous impacts and the importance of the changes that are happening with HCB in the classroom. So while there's been this huge progression, this huge growth and evolution in classroom and classroom instruction, we come to data. And data itself, it has evolved. Even just if you look at how we're scoring tests, rather than all being hand graded, there's scantrons, things that can be automated. But it definitely hasn't progressed at the same pace that classroom and classroom instruction has been able to achieve over time. And what that leaves us with is this very unfortunate situation that the impact of these programs and approaches are having on keiki are not apparent when you're looking at reports or program evaluations. It does show a little bit of the advantages and people are making gains in that, but it does not do justice to the level and depth of impact that these programs are having. So what Sarah and I will be sharing you about is initial steps we've taken. And so I want to hand it off to Claire now, and she'll start going through some of the methodology that we applied to take these initial steps along our journey.
Yeah, so like Chad was saying, in order for us to match this cultural approach of HCBE, we really need to be conducting culturally responsive research and assessment. And so the work that we do needs to go beyond the sometimes limiting capacity of standardized testing in order to capture more fluid concepts like culture, identity, and belonging. So we need to be able to align not just to the curriculum, but to—
There's another level of context that has to do, it's a little bit more, it's a little bit finer in detail, but that level of context has to do with like what exactly they're learning. What are the lessons and activities? What are the concepts that are being taught? And so what I wanted to show here is an example of one of the lessons that Kumu Nick had on kilo, which is the process of scientific observation. The activity itself, from that science perspective, was a hypothesis-driven thought process that they became familiar with, and they had to apply those learnings in many research projects and reports. So they had to learn not just the concept, but apply those concepts. And then they did that in writing, drawing graphs, and at the same time learning about culture. So what is showing on your screen now is one of the things that they submitted in doing this project. So they drew graphs, different plant growth, and how different conditions maximize that growth. But if this was the only thing that we're looking at to quote unquote grade or assess this program impact, as I said before, it doesn't do any justice. It doesn't address the cultural aspect. It doesn't address the social emotional learning that's involved. And so this is another level of context that's super, super important. It's the people that are collecting data, the people on that reporting side need to have that perspective and need to incorporate those things when they're developing, working with and selecting the data tools that they'll be using. So those are two levels. We hit on what the program is, what types of activities and learning. And then there's also a much broader context that we want to make sure we're aware of. And that's the framework that the curriculum is being built off. So Nick's program that he's running at Pāhoa Elementary has to do with this Nahupana Owl Framework. So also known as HA, or breath, there are 6 outcomes which end up with this acronym here, breath. And those outcomes are belonging, responsibility, excellence, aloha, total well-being, and Hawaii, so breath. It's a state initiative that incorporates both social emotional learning and Hawaiian culture. And it's one of the main focuses of HA and Nahupana Owl is on building an environment that's conducive for the keiki to thrive. It's being applied in some of the DOE schools and factors into the learning goals that schools select. And just the knowledge of these frameworks is also very crucial when we're looking at and selecting different data tools. This framework is also fundamental just to understand the Ike Hawaii program. What are those goals? What are the ultimate aims of these types of programs? So this is the Ike Hawaii framework. This is what Ike Hawaii, that program is built off of as far as a framework. Um, but I do want to point out, and we'll touch on this as we go through the presentation, but one of the reasons why we want to share all of these approaches with you is the fact that a lot of these can be tailored to so many different contexts. So this is just one framework that can be applied in the data tools. This framework will be obvious as we move through the data we collected, but I just want you to remember that this will not only work for this framework. It can work for whatever framework that you're applying within your school. If your professional practice does not have to deal with keiki directly, and perhaps you're just interested in your community group, maybe even just your ohana, you can use whatever framework you're interested in. So that's another level of context, this framework that everything's being developed off of. But this next type of context that I want to talk about also has to be an integral part of what we're understanding when selecting our approaches and data. And that next level of context has to do with what keiki are experiencing in their day-to-day lives. So I want to share with you this video, which was actually taken by Kumu Nick. How we're collecting and analyzing data, and all of the approaches that we're taking to incorporate this context.
So when we're designing this type of data collection, we want to work directly Again, it's really important for us to be reciprocal in our work. Kumu Nick has been extremely generous with his time. He's allowed us to come in, take up his instructional time, spend a lot of time with his keiki to answer those program level questions that we were interested in. So we wanted to also provide him with information that he could use to refine his professional practice. Another thing that we coded for in the data set was linguistic indicators. And so that's the difference between a keiki saying, I like learning about the Hawaiian culture, and I like learning about our Hawaiian culture, where that use of a possessive pronoun is indicating a sense of identity and ownership. That's what we really were hoping to capture in the data. And so again, knowing the context is key. It's only by being present and understanding and knowing about the lava and the kihei activity that we're able to understand that a keiki saying, we made the kihei and I felt good, is so much more than this kid likes arts and crafts. It's an indicator that this keiki feels safe in their learning environment and they're making those connections. And so it's only by having all of this context that we're allowed to get this stuff out of the data. If we didn't spend the time understanding all of those things about the class that Chad was explaining, we would miss really great gems in the data set. So once we've gone through and we've coded the data, we can quantify it and look at it numerically. So from these natural, comfortable talk story sessions where the keiki are just talking about what they do and how they feel, we can actually get numbers for analysis, and then we can look at it proportionally, which is what we see here in this graph. So here we're looking at the HA framework quantified, and Kumu Nick specifically wanted to focus on certain outcomes from that HA framework. He was interested in responsibility, belonging, and sense of Hawaii. And so what we can see here is that those outcomes are most proportionally present in the data set. And so with this methodology, we're able to quantitatively assess that impact that he's having on his students. And then we can let him know that he's achieving what he wanted to with his curriculum.
So that's the talk story approach, the talk story data tool that we've applied. We have a number of other tools, but super fast. Before I move on, I saw in the comments, first of all, that I got a little choppy during the video, so I apologize for that. I guess it fits with the theme of what I was trying to say during that slide, but basically that eruption impacted everything. So I think the eruption even impacted this presentation, and it drowned me out because it was so impactful. But all the slide was saying, what I was trying to say there was that it totally flipped the keiki's lives upside down. And so that's why that activity that I then moved into was such a great activity and approach that Kumu Nick took. And then one last thing before I move on to the keiki survey tool is that if there's any questions, just know that you'll be able, if you put them in the chat, then we'll find a way to get back to you. Okay, so now back to the presentation. Here are a number of other tools that we've applied. And these other tools give us data that can supplement that talk story data. And together, all of these different tools will tie all of this data together to give us a quote unquote report on the impact that these programs are having. So this keiki survey tool can be formatted in a lot of ways. There's a number of different questions that we put in these surveys. The example that is shown here are Likert, agree or disagree questions. And these have a lot to do with social emotional learning and those HA outcomes that were listed in that one framework slide. And I wanted to take an example of one of these Likert scale questions and also talk about how knowing the context of the keiki helps us to collect better and more accurate data. And that's the language that's being used. So we need to know where the keiki are coming from in order to speak their language. This question here is phrased, I don't know if you can see it, so I'll read it. It says, I like learning about Hawaiian kind things. So that language, we actually worked with Nick to design what's the best way to frame that question. If we had asked something like, different ancestral traditions that are incorporated in our lesson plans and assignments are extremely enjoyable, or, you know, something like that, it may just be confusing to the keiki. We want to make sure that we're asking the questions we think we're asking. And so it's super important. Again, context is coming into play as far as how important a role it plays. But we need to be able to tailor these things to the context that these tools will be used in. So the language that we're learning here, again, not only provides that degree of comfort, but it provides clarity to the keiki that we're surveying. And then that ensures for us that our data is accurate and that they're answering the questions we think that they're asking. Some of the other types of questions that can be put in here are different concept and picture identification. So we've used Olelo Hawaii terms and asked them to select a picture that is the meaning of that term. We've had open-ended questions. So tell me more about, as the example we used before, like, can you explain what does kilo mean to you? And then lastly, these surveys can be administered through phones, iPads, or computers. So again, it has to do with leveraging the technology that we have available. And just a quick funny story, in doing this, we figured out that iPads are magic, because I did know that they're excellent babysitters and they're great at calming down keiki, keeping them engaged. But what I didn't know was how advantageous it is in administering surveys. So we actually administered a survey on iPads, and keiki thought it was like an iPad game. And so I've never seen this before, but keiki were trying to lie and say that they hadn't done it. So they were trying to take surveys more than once. I've never seen that happen before, but just know that these new avenues of delivery can also be advantageous. And so those types of things too, we feel strongly should be leveraged in any kind of data approach that you're taking. Okay, so now back to this presentation. Another type of data tool that we've used is visual data. So capturing pictures. And we've all heard that saying goes that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And we don't always have 1,000 words of flexibility in a report to just explain what's going on. But by including pictures, we can provide context. We can provide a level of understanding that shows, on one hand, we can show what they're doing. They're doing work in the mala, but almost more importantly, it shows different types of maybe social emotional learning aspects, different HA outcomes that are really hard to capture in any other form. So this joy in learning, engagement, some of the faces aren't necessarily pure joy, but still great to see, because you see that level of comfortability, this identity and belonging where they feel comfortable enough to make funny faces. That in itself is extremely important. So we've just shared a couple of these data tools. Claire went through the talk story, there's survey data and visual data. And so this next slide goes through how we put those together in, which in this case is just a really brief, direct, to the point report that shows the impact of programming. So the numbers down here are actually from that talk story data that Claire went through. So that one sheet cape rectangle chart that Claire showed that responsibility was the most frequent, and then there's belonging and Hawaii. So those three things can then be used within our computer software so that it'll identify all quotes that were then assigned the theme of these three most frequent things. So this quote here was one of the ones that showed up that were strong in responsibility, belonging, and Hawaii. And in that way, we can choose a quote that is, and that we can back with data, is the collective voice of the keiki. So it's not just, quotes can be looked at as being soft, it can be cherry picking, oh, they're just picking the best quote. But what we do is we select quotes based on hard data, on those quantifications that we've gotten through the talk story analysis. And so let me read you this quote. It says, "I like learning about the Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian things, because then I can learn more and more about my ancestors and the stories they told. And then I can teach it to my younger sisters and brothers." So the responsibility here has to do with their kuleana, their responsibility to pass on the important knowledge that they've gained. They want to share it with their younger brothers and sisters. That belonging, learning more about my ancestors, giving them that connection, not just to their community, but to their surrounding Aina. It has that aspect of sense of belonging. And then of course, that sense of Hawaii. So speaking about Hawaiian culture, Hawaiian things, and how much they like learning about those things. So we have the talk story data here, both in the form of a quote and the quantitative data that we collected. And then we have this visual data here. This is actually a picture of the mala that the keiki worked in. And then to complete the picture, we put in that survey data. So 98% of keiki surveyed enjoyed learning about ʻIke Hawaii. We have a quantitative measurement of that level of engagement and interest that keiki have, and that 94% of them believe that ʻIke Hawaii is relevant today. So we also have data that we can show in a quantitative measure that keiki are taking that learning, they're taking it that step further. They can already see that the learning they're doing at school translates directly to the land and community that they live in. So that concludes our presentation to you, our sharing of these initial steps that we've taken. And we wanted to just kind of reiterate a couple of points. So first, again, we wanted to say that these methods are linguistically and developmentally aligned while also being rooted in Hawaiian culture. So that bridge is always important. Hawaiian culture always needs to be part of designing, selecting, collecting data and the data tools. All of that needs to be heavily influenced by Hawaiian culture. We also want to point out as a main takeaway that quantifying our qualitative data enables us to capture impact related to values outlined in HA, that framework that we use. And that quantification of the qualitative data is something which provides rigor to the data that we're reporting in what usually is more of just a strict qualitative measure. And then what's really important, almost the most important takeaway that we want you to have is the fact that these methods allow for the capacity to adapt to different age groups, activities, or instructional frameworks. So while we talked about HA here, as I did mention earlier, you can use any framework you want, okay? Any framework, any group of concepts that you want to focus on can be adapted to all of these data tools that we've gone through. And then also the fact that in tailoring it to your specific needs, because we're not all coming from the same school, we're not even all coming from schools themselves. And so these tools also need to be adopted in your context. So an example of that is we've worked with KVA, Kanehunamoku Voyaging Academy, here also on the island of Oahu. And they've tailored these tools to be able to use in their context. So the time to develop all of these tools that Claire referenced is not always possible in the capacity of different organizations. So that's the situation that KVA was faced with. They only had a limited time with certain groups of keiki. And so what they did was they came to us and we worked with them. We helped them kind of, cut down the time, adapt these techniques to their given needs and requirements. So we really want you to take that away, that these methods, as we said, should be the case with every data method or approach, is not prescriptive. We're not saying this is exactly how it needs to be, but what we're saying is these types of approaches and the way that we adapted them to our own context is what you can take with you. And so we really hope that there's been things that we shared here that kind of stood out to you, that kind of to set off that light in your head where it's like, hey, we can do this. And we really hope that you get that, because that takes us back to what Ku was saying, what I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. And that's the fact that what can we do? What can you do to help this whole movement keep that progression, to increase all of the momentum that we've generated? And so hopefully you can take something away from this presentation and use that as a response to what Ku is asking us to do. Take some of this and implement it into your practice. So we mahalo you again for your time. We hope that you have an excellent, enjoyable, informative day here. And we just want to once again say thank you and allowing us to share our journey along this path.
Couple of minutes for some questions. If you do have questions, if you could put it in the chat, just because we're time is short. But we did see that there was a hand raised earlier. So Darlene, if you wanted to ask your question, or if you wanted to put it in the chat, there's contact information for Chad and Claire. You can see in the bottom left, but just wanted to say mahalo nui to both of them for sharing today kind of the contemporary methodologies to help measure traditional good outcomes and actually contemporary good outcomes for students. So most of all, thank you very much for participating in today's workshop. You can see in the chat a little above, Tasha put a link to other presentations for session number 2. We hope that you'll please enjoy the rest of Kawaiwai no Nahupana HCBE4All. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Do we have a few seconds to answer some of the questions that are popping up in the chat? Okay.
Yes, if you have time.
I just see one really quick that I think that I can speak to. Dr. Kathleen Odell is asking, in utilizing HA themes, how important is it that those analyzing the data have a strong background and understanding of and/or experience with Hawaiian culture? So I'm not from here. I moved to Hawaii for grad school about 10 years ago. And so I think it is possible for somebody with a different amount of background to do this. You just have to put in the work to give yourself that background, to give that context to yourself. It's a lot of reading, but like going out in the community. You know, I've been super fortunate to have mentors like Lena Ala, who's in this session, to sort of help get me up to speed with those aspects. And, you know, one of the main things about this type of methodology is that, you know, it can't just be done by us. We have to be working with the Kumu. And so you can be an outsider and do this type of work. You just have to have the mindset of, I'm the expert on crunching numbers, or I'm a methods person, but I know that Kumu Nick is the cultural expert. And so I'm going to go to him about all of those things. And when you're working hand in hand and you have those cultural experts as members of your team, it's possible to do this type of work. And also it's great, you know, I've learned a lot and we have trainings on HA. So I really do think that it's possible to do that if you're, you know, not from here. So I hope that answers your question. Some folks saying that they would like to get in touch and discuss more. So please do reach out. I believe we have our email addresses on the slide that's up now, and drop them in the chat. And we love talking about this kind of stuff. I'm a real methods nerd, so I would love to discuss what you're doing and how you might apply these things and learn from you guys what you've been doing, how we can refine our practice as well. So mahalo.
Give us an opportunity if you want to take a second to unmute your video cameras or your just to kind of give Chad and Clara a round of applause and just thank you for sharing with us this morning. Yes.
Hey, yeah, so I was wondering if I wanted to get started maybe practicing with this qualitative analysis, as you folks demonstrated. Is there a good place to get started, or is that maybe something I should bring an expert into, consult with, or just what's the opportunity? I'm a teacher now working with the complex area and looking to maybe do something similar to what you folks showed.
That's awesome. I always think it's good to have an expert, but this is definitely something you can self-teach. So in terms of software, there's many options out there. We use both NVivo and RQDA. And there's actually a lot of great lectures up on YouTube where researchers are discussing how to do this sort of deductive inductive coding. So Brown and Clark are some of the professors who have really worked a ton on this methodology, and they've got great lectures up on YouTube. And so we're kind of living in a golden age where anybody can go on the internet and find, great resources. But also please do reach out if you have like nitty-gritty questions. We always love answering those.
Okay, thank you. So this is something that you could teach yourself and possibly create your own model, conceivably.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have a degree to do this type of work. I think you just have to have the willingness to put in the time. It will take some time. It took us quite a lot of time.
Thank you.
So one more time, it was NVivo and RQDA?
Yeah, so RQDA is free and it works with the R statistical computing package, which is also free. It does require a little bit of a learning curve, learning how to program, but it's totally free. And again, you can just go online and learn anything. And NVivo, Chad, I think you can speak more to NVivo than I can.
So NVivo we've used, and what's great about NVivo is it's really good, especially because this is such a time-consuming process. It can help you get an initial idea of themes and coding really, really quick. So that in itself is useful. It also has the capacity to go through and you can highlight certain sections that you would then assign certain topics or context that you have in your framework. And it in itself, it was what was used to generate that one figure that Claire showed, that rectangle. And there's a bunch of different things that NVivo can do to help you generate visualizations. So they have, I'm just starting to work with, they have like concept mapping. So even showing how different themes might have some overlap or connections to others based on their frequency. And there's just a bunch of things. There are aspects of the program that I haven't even been able to dive into yet. So Claire likes working with R, which is also great. And I think a lot of the capacity of both of them are comparable. What NVivo just automates a lot more things. And so depending on a person's background or interest as far as what you're looking to collect data on, that's how you would make that decision. But I found NVivo to be an extremely useful tool, especially when you want to collect data 1 week and then be sharing out something about that data just, in the next week, because this is in order to provide the rigor that Claire was talking about in that process. You need a lot of time. So what NVivo can do with that flash right off the bat is by no means a replacement of what the process that Claire shared. But what it enables, the advantage there is if you had a meeting the following week and you wanted to kind of share, just kind of like get an idea of what that data set was telling you, it would be, it'll give you that right off the bat. And so that is the value that I found in Vivo. As we talk through this, it's relevant to this question and one that had come up before. I thought it was just people weren't interested, but now I realize it was because I was muted. But what I was saying was that this had to do with the person who wanted to implement it in their complex area, but were unsure because of experience. So, and this has to do with using in vivo or any of the programs. What Claire and I do, we're very lucky to have each other, but that inter-rater reliability is crucial here. So we go through this data a number of times and we make sure that how these codes or themes are being applied align to each other. So especially if you're just starting off, that is even more important, because that's a good way for you to see, because everyone brings in their own background, their own set of ʻIke or knowledge. So if there's multiple people that are then getting the same data, you can be confident that you're moving in that right direction, and that you don't need to worry about, I've never done this before. Am I just pulling this all out of left field, or is there any validity to this? And that's one way that you can start to assess validity, is using another rater. Again, limitations on time, or you know, how much weight people are able to carry as far as job responsibilities, but that is one approach that can be used and that we've used a number of times.
And with that inter-rater reliability, that's where also you really want to loop your cultural experts, your Kumu, whoever's program you are evaluating in. Again, like, we're in discussion with them at every stage of the process, because again, they know the stuff better than we can ever hope to know. And so they're a real gut check for us, you know, when we get inside our own heads and we're sitting in front of our computers all day. But again, we do spend a lot of time with the data, and, you know, that's a plus and a minus. You know, time is precious, but also the more time you spend with your data, the better you know your data.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful.
Oh, you're very welcome. I did want to say, Claire and I are here and we love this stuff and can talk about it forever. So
yes,
we can't stay here forever, but if there are pressing questions, because I see people with hands up, we're here. So go ahead and ask them now. We cannot take all of the questions, but I also did want to point out that it's 10:35. So if there was a really, really important session that you wanted to attend in that next time slot, that's starting. So just letting you guys know, in no way am I saying we don't want to talk about this stuff, because we love it. But I just did want to announce that it is 10:35. So if you wanted to move, you can. The two hands that I can see up are Stephen Fox. And then, let's see. There's also, I think Brendan. Sorry, my font is so small with all these windows going, but we can take, I think, Claire, we have time to take 2 questions, right?
yeah, totally.
Okay, I think, well, I apologize if Brendan, your hand went up first, but the first one I saw was Stephen, so we can take Stephen Fox, we can take your question now?
I can keep it short. So basically, really good research. It's very cool. It's very kind of like close to research I've done on arts and well-being. And I have, actually I work on the Kamehameha Bay Youth Mentoring Program. I helped design that, and Ku is part of our advisory committee for that. Yeah, really interesting. And you're so well poised to go into making it very quantitative from here. So you'll hear from me. For me, I took the themes from, and I used thematic analysis too. What Atrita Sterling, I think, was one of the authors I cited for that. I did my first master's at Manoa, so I wonder if we know some of the same people in that. So then I took those themes and used that with structural equation modeling to get some nice hard numbers, which is really good for grant stuff these days. Anyway, so I'll stop there, and you'll hear from me. Thank you.
Mahalo.
We're excited to hear that. Please do reach out. I'm sure we can learn a lot from you. So please, we're excited to hear from you. And then I think Brent, was it Brendan? I'm so sorry if I'm getting the name wrong, but
I left my hand up accidentally. I didn't realize after you guys answered my first question, I took it down. I could just say though, yeah, I'm working on a literacy grant that goes complex wide, including Pāhoa School. So hopefully get a chance to learn more about that experience. But part of it is cultural and community engagement, and this type of data collection is just like so perfect. So I was like thrilled to be a part of this and see it, and I'm really excited to check out NVivo and RQDA, and that's kind of what I was asking, like, how do I get started? I want to build up a model like right now and try it out, and you know, but I know it's not going to happen that fast, but I think this could be an incredible tool if we can at least create the process and bring it to the coaches that we have at the school and say, hey, we can help you set this up for a project you guys want to do. And you guys know the context at your school the best. So we can work together to develop the context. And then I can show you how to maybe use this tool, you know, and just collect that data. So I think that's so cool.
thank you, Brendan. That's we're super happy to hear that. So I guess your hand was still up because it was a high five, right? So thank you.
There you go. Mahalo nui.
And if anyone is interested in using R and RQDA, the free software, please feel free to reach out to me. I can point you in the direction of various resources, what packages to use, and the information of how to get started with that, especially for those who have used it before. The RQDA package is a really great companion to R if you're doing qualitative analysis, especially if you were a formerly broke grad student and can't afford NVivo, or perhaps a small nonprofit.
Yeah, that is a huge advantage. Jermaine, you know how you were asking about one versus the other. So each of them has their advantages. And I think that's like cost is a huge advantage that R has.
This is so exciting. So I'm probably in the same literacy project. And so I do think, you know, having another training or collaborating on this would be so wonderful for us, especially it's a 4-year project and we're just in the ohia part, the very beginnings of sprouting this literacy project. But how wonderful, as one of our hopes for this, our nonprofit, is to have a cultural based assessment, but that does not always look the same in the two worlds that we have to thrive in both the Western and the Hawaiian world. And so how do we just make sure that our values and our core beliefs are what is valued and assessed, and how that is proven? So I just I probably could stay here all day because it's exciting. You know, it's exciting. It's when two worlds meet, and I just feel like this beautiful reciprocity that can happen in this piece that I need to learn and grow and learn from you folks. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but for anyone who's not, the book Indigenous Statistics by Walter Emerson really gets at what you were just saying about, like, how do we make sure we're measuring what we value. And it's really talks a lot about, like, methods are just tools. It's the mindset of the researcher and how you apply and what you value and choose to measure that really makes or breaks what you're doing, the evaluation, and it's, you know, it's the methodologies that can either harm by measuring the wrong thing or using the wrong tool, or they can help, they can be healing. So having, you know, an indigenous focused research program where you're doing things from this cultural value point and through a cultural lens, that can be very healing. So it's really exciting to hear that you're in that ohia stage of your literacy project. Like, it's the time you can lay that groundwork to just build that beautiful tree that will shelter the plants underneath, to use a metaphor that I really like and that really suits the Pāhoa context.
Super, super exciting, Jermaine. Mahalo for sharing that.
Well, thank you very much. I must leave, but I hope to keep in contact with both of you.
Mhm.
Have a great day.
Thank
Mahalo.
you.
And yes, anyone else with questions, please do feel free to reach out. We've dropped our email addresses in the chat. Mahalo.
Mahalo.
Did anyone else have a question? If not, please reach out to us at any point after this with any questions. I know sometimes, you know, they don't come up until you're heading home at the end of the day. I guess we don't really need to head home from this conference, but at the same time, if thoughts come up later today or tonight, please just reach out. We'll be happy to address your concerns or questions and help out wherever we can.
Mahalo nui kako. Aloha. Ahui ho.
Ahui ho.